Clara Hayes ripped the $20 bill right out of the man's hand before he could stuff it back in his pocket. The whole backyard went dead silent. Ethan froze with his beer halfway to his mouth. "You bet on me," she said, not loud, not shaking worse than that calm. "You bet a grown man $20 that he couldn't get the mean lady next door to smile." She folded the bill once and slid it into her own jacket. "Fine. If you're going to gamble on me, gentlemen, at least make it worth watching." Nobody laughed. And nobody, not Ethan, not Mark, not Clara herself, knew that little green piece of paper would drag three broken people straight into the truth. Before you go any further, drop the name of your city in the comments, so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe some folks are worth more than a bet, subscribe, and stay with me to the very end. Ethan Cole never wanted to be the kind of man people talked about. He'd spent 29 years making sure of it. He kept his lawn short. He paid his bills the day they came. He said yes, sir, and no, ma'am, to people twice his age, even when they didn't deserve it. And he raised his daughter with the same quiet stubbornness his own father had used to raise him. No yelling, no drama, just a man who showed up. So when the whole mess started in his own backyard on a Saturday in June, the worst part wasn't that he'd been embarrassed. The worst part was that he'd deserved it. It began the way most trouble begins, with Mark Cole running his mouth. Mark was a firefighter, 6'2", built like a refrigerator, with a laugh you could hear 3 houses down. He and Ethan had been best friends since the 9th grade, and Mark had exactly one flaw as a human being: he could not under any circumstances leave a quiet moment alone. The two of them were standing by the grill watching smoke curl off a rack of ribs when Mark tipped his beer toward the fence line. "You see who moved into the Delgado place?" Ethan didn't look up. "Somebody moved in?" "Somebody," Mark repeated like the word offended him. "Ethan, that's Clara Hayes." "That's supposed to mean something to me." Mark stared at him. "You don't know who Clara Hayes is?" "Should I, brother?" Mark set his beer down on the edge of the grill like he needed both hands for what he was about to say. "Clara Hayes is a city building inspector. The city building inspector. You know the site over on Fulton they shut down for 6 weeks last fall. The one that cost Dwyer Construction $140,000. Vaguely. Her, that was her. She walked onto that job with a clipboard, and she red-tagged the whole thing over a railing speck. Grown men contractors, foremen, guys who eat rebar for breakfast, they hide when they see her truck. There's a nickname. I don't want to know the nickname. They call her the Ice Inspector." Ethan flipped a rib. "That's a stupid nickname. It fits, though. Guy I know down at the station, his brother-in-law does drywall. He says she once made a crew tear out an entire ceiling because they buried a junction box. No warning. No, hey, fix it next time. Just nope. Rip it out. She doesn't smile. She doesn't blink. She doesn't do the little chit-chat thing. You say good morning to her, you're lucky you get a nod. And right then, because the universe has a cruel sense of timing, Clara Hayes came out onto her own back porch next door, maybe 40 feet away. She had a mug of coffee in one hand and a stack of mail in the other. Dark hair pulled back tight, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She wasn't looking at them. She wasn't looking at anything except the electric bill she was frowning at. Mark lowered his voice, which for Mark meant he only got about 30% quieter. $20, he said. Ethan finally looked up. "What? $20 says you can't do it." "Do what?" "Win her over, the Ice Inspector. Get her to actually like you, a real conversation. Get her to laugh even. I'll give you a whole month." Mark was grinning now, that big dumb grin that had gotten them both into trouble since they were 15. "Come on, you're the quiet, sensitive type. Single dad, makes furniture with his bare hands. Ladies love that. If anybody's got a shot at melting the Ice Inspector, it's you." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not betting on a person, Mark. It's not betting on a person, it's betting on you." "That's the same thing." "It is absolutely not the same thing. $20, 1 month. You get the coldest woman in the county to warm up to you, I pay. You strike out, you buy the beer for the summer. That's it. Low stakes. It's fun." And here is where Ethan Cole made the mistake he would spend the next several months trying to undo. He didn't say no. He should have. Every decent instinct in him said, no, leave it. That's a real human being over there reading her mail. But he was tired, and the ribs smelled good, and Mark was already laughing, and there's a version of every man that just wants to be one of the guys for 5 minutes. So instead of saying no, Ethan said the thing that felt safe. He said, "You're an idiot," which in the language of two men who have known each other since 9th grade is not a no. Mark, delighted, dug into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled 20, and slapped it onto the little side table by the grill. "There, it's official. 20 says you can't crack her." "I'm not touching that." "It's on the table, brother. It's just sitting there. It's destiny." And that's the moment, that exact moment, with the 20 on the table, and Mark laughing, and Ethan half smiling despite himself, that a voice came over the fence. Flat, even, close. "Which one of you is the idiot, and which one of you is the coward?" Both men turned. Clara Hayes was standing at the fence line. She'd crossed her whole yard without either of them noticing, because that is a thing she was apparently very good at, arriving before you knew she was coming. The coffee mug was still in her hand. Her expression hadn't changed at all. That was the frightening part. She wasn't angry. Angry would have been easier. She was just looking at them the way she probably looked at a support beam she'd already decided was going to fail. Mark's grin evaporated. "Ms. Hayes, hey, we were just—" "I heard what you were just." She took a slow sip of her coffee. "Firefighter Wright Station 19. Mark blinked. "Yeah. How'd you— You parked your truck in front of the hydrant on Ellison last Tuesday. Red curb. I remember faces." She let that sit for exactly 1 second, then moved on because she was done with Mark. He was not the interesting one. She looked at Ethan. Ethan, to his enormous credit, did not try to smile his way out of it. He did not do the thing men do, the AW shucks, it's not what it sounds like dance. He set his beer down, and he looked her in the eye, and he said the truth. "It's exactly what it sounds like," he said. "He bet me $20 I couldn't get you to like me, and I didn't say no fast enough. That's on me." For the first time, something moved in Clara's face. It wasn't a smile. Let's be clear. It was more like the very distant cousin of a smile, a single raised eyebrow, a fractional tilt of the head, the look of a woman recalculating. "Huh," she said. "I'm sorry," Ethan went on. "It was a stupid thing to be part of. You didn't move in here to be somebody's barbette. I'd apologize better, but I don't really know how, without making it worse." "You could stop talking," Clara offered. "Yeah, that's fair." Silence. The ribs hissed on the grill. Mark looked like he wanted to climb inside the propane tank. Then Clara did the thing that neither of them saw coming. She reached over the fence, plucked the $20 bill right off the little side table, and folded it once crisp like she was creasing a document. "Hey," Mark started. "This is mine now," Clara said, sliding it into the pocket of her jacket. "You put a price on me at my own house. The least you can do is let me hold the money." She looked back at Ethan, and the eyebrow went up again. "So here's how this is going to go. You two want to make a game out of the mean lady next door, fine. But I'm not going to be the prize. If you're going to bet on me, gentlemen, at least make it worth watching." And then she turned around and walked back across her yard, coffee in one hand, mail in the other, $20 in her pocket, without another word. Mark waited until her back door clicked shut. Then he whispered, "Bro, she's terrifying." Ethan didn't answer. He was still looking at the fence. Here is what nobody at that barbecue understood, least of all Ethan. He wasn't thinking about the bet. He was thinking about the way she'd said it. At least make it worth watching. Not "how dare you," not "stay away from me," not a threat, not tears, not a lecture. She'd taken a nasty little moment that was designed to make her small, and she'd picked it up and turned it into something she controlled. She'd walked into her own humiliation and walked out owning it. Ethan had spent his whole life around people who fell apart under pressure. His ex-wife had. His father, God rest him, had drunk himself into an early grave because he never learned how to hold anything heavy without cracking. and here was a woman who'd been publicly reduced to a punchline by two grown men in her own backyard, and she'd handled it with more grace than the men who'd done it. He wasn't attracted to her. Not yet. It was earlier than that, and cleaner. He was impressed. And Ethan Cole had not been impressed by another human being in a very, very long time. That night after everyone left, Ethan did the dishes while his daughter Lily sat at the kitchen counter drawing a picture of what she claimed was a horse but had the general proportions of a couch. Lily was 7. She had her mother's eyes and none of her mother's habits, thank God, and she had a way of asking the exact question you didn't want to answer. "Daddy, is the new neighbor mean?" Ethan turned off the water. "Where'd you hear that?" "Uncle Mark said she's the ice inspector." "Uncle Mark," Ethan said carefully, "should mind his own business." "Is she mean, though?" Ethan thought about it. He was a man who took questions from his daughter seriously because he remembered being a kid and knowing exactly when an adult was feeding him a line. "No," he said finally. "I don't think she's mean. I think people call her mean because she doesn't let them get away with things. Sometimes that's the same as being strong and people don't like it when a woman's strong, so they come up with a nickname." Lily considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "That's not very nice." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's not." "Are you going to be nice to her?" And there it was. The question underneath the question, the one his 7-year-old had walked straight into without knowing. "Yeah, baby," Ethan said. "I'm going to be nice to her. Not because of a bet, because it's the right thing." Lily nodded like the matter was settled and went back to drawing her horse couch, and Ethan stood there in his kitchen with the water dripping off his hands, and he realized he meant it. That was going to be the problem. 2 doors down and 1 house over. Clara Hayes was not drawing horses. Clara Hayes was sitting on her kitchen floor, back against the cabinets with the $20 bill unfolded on the tile in front of her, and her phone lighting up for the 4th time in an hour. She didn't have to look to know who it was. She'd blocked the number 3 times. He always found a new one. That was the thing about Victor Hale. He was patient in the way that termites are patient in the way that water is patient with stone. He didn't kick doors down. He just never ever stopped. "Just want to talk, that's all. You owe me that much." She turned the phone face down. She didn't cry. Clara had done all her crying years ago in a different city, in a relationship she still couldn't fully explain to the 2 therapists she'd cycled through since. Victor had never once raised a hand to her. That was the part nobody understood. There were no bruises to point to, no police report, no dramatic scene. There was just 6 years of a man who could make her doubt her own memory, who could turn her every strength into a character flaw. "You're so difficult, Clara. You're impossible to please, Clara. No wonder you're alone, Clara, who could put up with this." She'd built her whole adult life out of the wreckage of believing him. She'd become an inspector because inspectors deal in facts. In codes. In right and wrong, you could measure with a tape and a level. Nobody could gaslight a load calculation. A beam was rated for the weight, or it wasn't. She'd made a career out of being the one person in the room who couldn't be talked into ignoring what was true, and people hated her for it. They called her cold. They called her the ice inspector. They said she had no heart. They had it exactly backwards. She had too much heart. That was the whole problem. She'd just learned the hard and expensive way to build a wall around it 3 feet thick and rated for seismic events. She looked at the 20 on the floor. She should have been furious about the bet. Part of her was. But a smaller, more honest part of her had watched that quiet furniture maker set his beer down and look her dead in the eye and say, "It's exactly what it sounds like. And that's on me." No excuses, no charm, no performance. And something in her chest had done a thing it had not done in a very long time. It had gotten curious. She hated that. Curiosity was how it always started. Curiosity was the crack in the wall. "Don't," she said out loud to nobody. "Don't you dare." She picked the 20 up off the floor, smoothed it flat, and stuck it under a magnet on the refrigerator, where she'd have to look at it every single day. A reminder. Not of him. Of her. Of the rule she'd made and never broken since she left Victor. Nobody gets to decide what I'm worth but me. Gag. The next morning was the Sunday, and Ethan was out in his driveway at 7 a.m. with the garage open and a half-built dresser on his workbench. This was the thing people didn't know about Ethan Cole. He built furniture for a living, but he built it for his life. When his head was full, when something was chewing on him, he went out to the garage and he put his hands on wood and the world got quiet. His father had left him almost nothing. A bad name, a drinking problem to inherit and refuse, and one good set of chisels. Ethan had turned those chisels into a whole existence. He was sanding a drawer face when he heard the crunch of gravel and looked up to find Clara Hayes standing at the end of his driveway in running clothes, hair down for once, out of breath. He straightened up slow. "Morning. You're up early." "So are you." She nodded at the garage. "This how you make a living, or just how you avoid your neighbors?" There it was again, that dry, flat delivery that most people mistook for coldness. Ethan was starting to understand it wasn't cold at all. It was a test. She said something with a hook in it, and waited to see if you'd flinch. He didn't flinch. "Little of both," he said, and went back to sanding. That was it. He didn't chase. He didn't invite her in, didn't lay on the charm, didn't try to win anything. He just told her the truth and let her decide what to do with it. And that, though neither of them would have said it out loud, was the exact opposite of everything Victor Hale had ever been. Clara stood at the end of the driveway a moment longer than she needed to. "That dresser," she said finally. "The drawer's gonna stick. You didn't leave enough clearance on the runner." Ethan looked at the drawer, looked at her. "You don't even know what kind of runner I'm using." "Bottom mount. I can see the dado from here." She shrugged. "It'll swell in the summer. Stick every August. Leave yourself a 30-second on each side." And she jogged off down the street before he could answer. Ethan stood there for a long moment. Then he pulled the drawer, measured the clearance, and grinding his teeth the whole time, found out she was right. "Son of a gun," he muttered. Down the block. If he could have seen it, Clara Hayes was smiling for the first time in about a month. Just a little. Just to herself. Just where nobody could see it, and use it against her. The bet was already dead. Both of them knew it, and neither of them had said it. It had died the second she took the 20 off the table, the second he told the truth, in front of God and Mark and everybody. What was left wasn't a bet. What was left was two people who'd each spent years building walls for very good reasons, standing on either side of a fence. Each one wondering carefully, quietly, in the private hours, where nobody could see whether the other one might be the first person in a long time worth taking down a single brick for. Ethan didn't know about Victor yet. He didn't know about the phone that lit up all night, or the 6 years, or the reason a strong woman had built her whole self out of things you could measure with a level. He just knew that his difficult neighbor had walked into a humiliation and walked out standing taller than the men who caused it, and had then correctly diagnosed a flaw in his cabinetry from 40 feet away. And he could not stop thinking about it. And Clara didn't know about the chisels, or the father, or the little girl drawing a horse that looked like a couch. She just knew that a quiet man had looked her in the eye and refused to lie to her, which was so rare in her experience that she'd had to go home and sit on the floor about it. 2 doors down, the 20 sat under a magnet on her refrigerator, and 140 miles away in a city Clara had left specifically so she would never have to see it again. Victor Hale was sitting in his car outside an address he shouldn't have had, looking at a photograph on his phone of a woman jogging past a garage next to a man he didn't recognize. He'd been patient for 3 years. He was starting to feel like his patience was about to pay off. But Clara Hayes was done being anybody's bet, anybody's prize, anybody's project. She just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost her to prove it, or that the quiet man next door, the one who told the truth and didn't chase, was going to be standing right beside her when she did. The son of a gun, who couldn't leave a stuck drawer alone, showed up at Clara Hayes's door 6 days later, And he wasn't holding flowers, and he wasn't holding an apology. He was holding the drawer. Clara opened the door in a gray city sweatshirt with a pen still tucked behind her ear from whatever paperwork she'd been buried in, and she looked at the drawer, and then she looked at Ethan, and she said, "You're kidding." 32nd on each side, Ethan said. "You were right. It slid clean the first try. I don't like it, but you were right." "So you brought me the drawer." "I brought you the drawer." She stared at him for a second like she was recalculating a load again. Most men would rather lose a finger than admit a woman fixed their work. "Most men are wrong a lot then," Ethan said. "Seems like a hard way to live." And there it was, the first real crack. Not a smile exactly, but the corner of her mouth did something, a small involuntary thing she caught and killed a half-second too late, and both of them saw it happen, and both of them pretended they didn't. Clara took the drawer out of his hands like she was confiscating it. "I'm keeping this," she said. "Evidence." "Evidence of what?" "That you can be taught." And she shut the door. Ethan stood on her porch for a second, and then he laughed quiet just to himself, walking back down her steps, because he understood standing there that he'd just won something, and it wasn't the bet. The bet was dead. This was different. This was the sound of a woman letting exactly one brick come out of a 3-foot wall and enjoying it, and hating that she enjoyed it. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday, things had already changed in a way neither of them would have admitted to a living soul. It started at the fence. Clara had a bad habit, which was that she worked too much and ate too little, and stood in her backyard at 9 at night going through inspection reports on her phone, because the office chair hurt her back and the yard was quiet. Ethan had a different bad habit, which was that he couldn't sleep, hadn't been able to since the divorce, and so he was out in the garage most nights until the neighbors' lights went off. So it was almost mathematical that they'd end up at the fence at the same time, her side and his side, two people who were bad at resting. "You always work this late?" he asked, the first night not looking up from the piece he was sanding. "You always sand at midnight." "It's 10. "It's 10:40. "Huh." He checked his phone. "It's 10:40. She almost smiled again. He was learning to watch for it. The almost smile, the way you'd watch for a deer at the edge of a field. Hold still, don't spook it, let it come out on its own. "You never told me your name," she said. "First night. You told me the truth about the bet, which nobody does, but you never told me your name." "Ethan." "Ethan what?" "Cole." Something flickered across her face. "You're the Cole that does the built-ins, the kitchen on Marchetti, the window seat with the hidden storage." "You've seen my window seat." "I inspected the addition it went into," Clara said. "Whoever framed that job should be arrested. But the finished carpentry was the only thing in the house up to code. I remember thinking somebody in this town still gives a damn." She paused. "That was you." Ethan set the sanding block down. It was the first compliment he'd gotten from her, and she'd delivered it like a citation deadpan buried in an insult about somebody else's framing, and it landed harder than any compliment he'd gotten in years precisely because she clearly didn't hand them out. "That was me," he said. "Huh," Clara said again. And that was the whole conversation, but he noticed she didn't go inside for another 20 minutes. The thing about Ethan that Clara couldn't file away, and Clara filed everything that was her whole nature, she needed people sorted into categories she could measure, was that he didn't want anything from her. She'd spent her entire adult life reading The Angle. Every contractor who bought her a coffee wanted a variance. Every man who complimented her wanted access. Victor had wanted all of her every square inch and had spent 6 years slowly annexing it. She'd gotten so good at spotting the ask underneath the kindness that she'd forgotten kindness could come without one. Ethan just kept showing up at the fence and telling her true things and going back inside. By the second week, she'd started to notice she was disappointed on the nights he wasn't out there. That scared her more than Victor's phone calls. The phone calls, meanwhile, had not stopped. If anything, they'd changed shape, which was the thing that made her skin crawl, because a change in shape meant Victor was thinking, and Victor thinking was always worse than Victor angry. The messages had gone from, Just want to talk to something quieter, more surgical. Saw you moved. New town, fresh start. I get it. I'm happy for you, Clara. I really am. I just hope he knows what he's getting. She read that one 4 times before she understood the he in it. And when she did understand it, she stood very still in her kitchen for a long time because Victor didn't know about any he. There was no he. Ethan was a neighbor with a stuck drawer. There was nothing to know, which meant Victor was fishing, or Victor was watching. She told herself it was fishing. She was very good at telling herself things. The night it broke open, the real crack, the one that couldn't be pretended away, started stupid. It started with a smoke detector. Ethan was in the garage a little before 11 when he heard it. The specific electronic shriek of a hardwired detector going off next door, and he was over Clara's fence and pounding on her back door before he'd even decided to do it, because he was a man who'd lost a father to bad decisions in the dark, and he did not take alarms lightly. She yanked the door open with a stepladder in one hand and a look on her face like she was going to murder the ceiling. "It's the detector," she snapped. "It's not a fire. It's a 9-volt battery from the Clinton administration. Would you please stop pounding on my—" "Then let me change it. You're gonna fall off that ladder." "I am a licensed building inspector. I think I can operate a—" "You've got a stepladder rated for a 200-pound man, and you're standing on the top rung, which every single warning label tells you not to do, so either you don't respect the codes you enforce, or you're too stubborn to ask for help, and I know which one it is." That stopped her. The alarm was still shrieking. They were both standing in her kitchen at 11 at night, glaring at each other, and Ethan realized what he'd said, and braced for her to throw him out. Instead, and this was the moment, this was the brick coming out of the wall, the big one, the load-bearing one, instead of getting cold, she started to laugh. It came out of her like something she'd forgotten how to do, rusty and surprised and real, and she put the ladder down and pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth like she could stop it, and she couldn't. "Get up there and change the stupid battery," she said, laughing. "God, fine, you win. You respect the codes more than I do. Get up there." He got up there. He changed the battery. The alarm stopped. And in the sudden ringing silence of her kitchen, Ethan looked down from the ladder and saw Clara Hayes actually laughing, hair a mess, guard all the way down for one unguarded second, and he thought, oh no, and he thought it with real dread, because he'd promised his daughter he was going to be nice to this woman as a matter of principle, and instead he'd gone and fallen for her, which was a much more dangerous thing to do to a person who'd already been used as somebody's bet. "What?" Clara said, catching the look. "What's that face?" "Nothing." He came down off the ladder. "You should get a carbon monoxide detector too. Yours is missing." "Don't inspect my house, Ethan. I'm just saying, don't inspect my house." But she was still smiling when she said it, and she made him a cup of coffee, even though it was 11 at night, and they sat at her kitchen table, and that was the first time either of them stayed on purpose. They talked for 2 hours. It didn't feel like 2 hours. She told him about her job, the real version, not the ICE inspector version, how she'd red-tagged a daycare last year, because the emergency exit had been chained shut to keep the toddlers from wandering, and how the owner had screamed at her in the parking lot, called her a heartless witch, told her she was going to cost 40 families their child care, and how she'd stood there and taken it. Because 6 weeks later, a fire at a different daycare across the county. One she hadn't inspected killed nobody. Nobody. Because that one's exits were clear, and she'd sat in her truck and cried. Not because of the screaming, but because being hated was the price of the kids getting out, and she'd pay that price every single day, and twice on Sunday. "That's why they call you cold," Ethan said quietly. "Because you'd rather be hated than watch a kid burn." "They call me cold because it's easier than admitting I'm right." She turned her mug in a slow circle on the table. "You're the first person who ever said it the other way." He almost told her right then about his father, about the smoke detector that had been dead in his childhood home, the fire that hadn't happened, but easily could have, the drinking, the long, slow burn of watching a man he loved refuse every hand anyone reached out to him. He almost told her all of it. But he'd learned something about Clara in 2 weeks, which was that she didn't trust things that came too fast. So instead, he just said, "For what it's worth, I'd rather have the cold neighbor who'd pull my kid out of a fire than the friendly one who'd chain the door." And Clara looked at him across the table with an expression he couldn't read and said, "You have a kid." And Ethan realized he'd never mentioned Lily. "Yeah," he said. "A daughter. Lily. She's 7. She thinks you're mean, by the way. Uncle Mark's fault." He smiled. "She also drew you a horse. It looks like a couch. I've been meaning to give it to you, but I couldn't figure out how to explain why my kid drew a couch for the scary neighbor." Something happened to Clara's face that he did not expect. It closed not the cold way, a different way, a soft, frightened way, and she looked down at her coffee and said very carefully, "You have a daughter." Did I say something?" "No." She shook her head fast. "No, it's fine. It's good. I like kids." And she stood up and started clearing the mugs, even though his was still half full, and the wall was back up all 3 feet of it, faster than he'd ever seen it go up. And Ethan didn't understand. It couldn't understand it, because he didn't know that Victor Hale had spent 6 years telling Clara she was too broken to be a mother, too difficult, too cold, that no child should have to grow up with someone like her, and that the deepest wound Victor ever put in her wasn't about herself at all. It was the family he'd convinced her she didn't deserve and would only ruin. Ethan didn't know any of that. He just knew the temperature in the room had dropped 40 degrees, and he'd done it somehow, and he was smart enough to leave. "Thanks for the coffee," he said, standing. "And for saving me from your own smoke detector." "Ethan!" She stopped him at the door. Her back was to him, hands braced on the counter. "The horse. That looks like a couch." A pause. "I'd like to see it. If she wants me to have it." Yeah. She still didn't turn around. "Tell her the mean neighbor said thank you." He walked home over the fence, and he lay awake till 4, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, it wasn't the divorce keeping him up. It was the way she'd flinched at the word daughter, like the word had teeth. Across the fence, Clara didn't sleep at all. The next morning, Victor's message said, "Cute kid next door. She yours now too. You always did like fixer-uppers. Guess it runs both ways." Clara read it standing in her kitchen and had to put the phone down on the counter and hold the edge of the sink because her hands were shaking too hard to keep gripping it. Because there it was, not fishing, watching. He'd seen Lily. He'd seen a 7-year-old child. He'd been close enough to know she lived next door, close enough to make her part of it, and Victor Hale had never in his life mentioned a person unless he was already deciding how to use them. She'd moved 140 miles to get away from him. She'd changed her number 3 times. She'd told exactly no one where she was going. And he was standing close enough to her new life to describe the little girl who drew couches. Clara did something then that she would think about for a long time afterward. She almost called Ethan. Her thumb was over his number. She'd put it in her phone the night of the smoke detector, told herself it was for emergencies, told herself a lot of things, and she almost called him and said, "There's a man and he's dangerous. In a way you can't see, and he's looking at your daughter." But then the old voice started up, the one Victor had installed in her over 6 years, the one that sounded so much like reason. "You'll drag them into it. You'll make it his problem. You'll ruin a good man's life with your baggage, and when it goes bad, and it always goes bad, Clara, he'll look at you the way everyone eventually looks at you, and he'll be right to. Protect them. Protect them by staying away. That's the loving thing. That's the only loving thing you know how to do." She put the phone down. She did not call Ethan. Instead, she pulled back. Cleanly, professionally, the way she did everything. When Ethan waved from his driveway the next morning, she nodded and went inside. When he came to the fence that night, she wasn't there, and she wasn't there the night after. And by the 3rd night, Ethan stood in his backyard with a piece of sandpaper he wasn't using, looking at her dark kitchen window, understanding that a door had closed and having no idea why. He told himself to let it go. She didn't owe him anything. The bet was dead, the neighbor was private, that was her right. He told himself that for about a week, and then Lily's horse that looked like a couch was still sitting on the kitchen counter, where he'd propped it, and every time he saw it, he thought about a woman flinching at the word daughter like it was a slur, and Ethan Cole was not built to let that go. So he did the only thing he knew how to do, which was the honest thing. He wrote a note. He was not a note writer. It took him 4 drafts, and the final version just said, "Whatever I said about my kid, I got it wrong somehow, and I'm sorry. I don't need to know why. Lily still wants you to have the horse. It's on your porch. E." And he taped it to the couch horse and left it on her doormat and went to work and told himself that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. Clara found the drawing on her porch at 6 in the morning on her way to a job site, and she read the note standing in the cold, and she looked at the horse that a 7-year-old she'd never met had drawn for the mean lady next door, and Clara Hayes, who had done all her crying years ago in a different city, sat down on her own front steps at 6 in the morning and cried like the wall had finally cracked all the way through, because that was the thing Victor had never understood about her, and Ethan had understood in 2 weeks without even trying. She didn't want to be conquered. She didn't want to be won. She wanted somebody to get it wrong and not know why and apologize anyway and leave the door open without shoving her through it. She wanted exactly the thing this quiet furniture maker had just done, and the fact that she wanted it so badly, the fact that a child's drawing of a couch horse had gotten past a wall rated for seismic events, terrified her all the way down to the foundation. She kept the horse. She put it on her refrigerator next to the $20 bill. And she went to Ethan's house that night after Lily was asleep, and when he opened the door, she didn't come in, and she didn't sit down. She stood on his porch with her arms crossed like she was cold, even though it was June, and she said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to not fix it. Can you do that? Because you're a fixer. I can see it all over you. You fixed my smoke detector and my drawer, and you'd fix me too if I let you. And I need you to just listen and not fix anything. Can you do that?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "I can do that." "There's a man," Clara said. And then she stopped because saying it out loud made it real, and she'd worked so hard to keep it unreal. "His name is Victor. We were together 6 years. He never hit me. I need you to understand that up front because everybody's first question is, did he hit you? Like that's the only kind of damage there is, and it's not the worst kind. The worst kind is the kind you can't point to." She was talking fast now, faster than he'd ever heard her, all the professional flatness gone. "He never hit me. He just spent 6 years teaching me that everything strong about me was a defect, that I was cold, difficult, impossible to love, that I'd ruin anybody I got close to. And I left. I left, and I moved, and I changed my number, and I did everything right. Everything. And it doesn't matter because he found me anyway. He's been messaging me since before you and I ever said a word to each other. And 3 days ago..." Her voice finally cracked, the first real fracture in it. "3 days ago, he sent me a message about Lily. He described her. Ethan, he knows about your daughter. He's been close enough to see her. And I pulled away from you because the voice in my head that still sounds like him told me the loving thing to do was protect you both by disappearing, and I almost did it. I almost just vanished on you, and then your kid's horse showed up on my porch, and I couldn't..." She stopped. She was out of words and out of air. Ethan didn't fix it. He'd promised he wouldn't, and it was the hardest promise he'd ever kept because every cell in his body wanted to. He wanted to ask what Victor looked like, and where he was, and whether he owned a truck he could go find. He wanted to call Mark. He wanted to stand between this woman and everything that had ever hurt her. But he'd made a promise, so instead of doing any of that, he said the only thing that was actually true and actually helped. "I believe you," he said, "about all of it. The kind of damage you can't point to. I believe that's real, and I believe it's the worst kind. My dad did a version of it to himself and to us, so I believe you." He took a breath. "And I'm not scared. Not of him knowing about Lily, not of your baggage, not of any of it. You told me not to fix it, and I won't. But I'm not going anywhere either, and that's not me being a hero, that's just me telling you a true thing the way I always do. You can pull back if you need to. I'll still be at the fence. Clara stood on his porch and looked at him for a long, long time. "You're a real problem, Ethan Cole," she finally said, and her voice was wrecked and almost laughing. "You know that you're a genuine problem. I've been told. She didn't come in that night. She wasn't ready, and he didn't ask her to be, and that the not asking was worth more than 100 nights of him asking. But she was at the fence the next evening, and the one after that, and something between them had shifted from a game into something with weight, something load-bearing, something that could hold real trouble, which was good. Because real trouble was coming. It came on a Wednesday, 12 days later, in the form of a truck Ethan didn't recognize, parked across the street from Clara's house at 7 in the morning. Engine running, a man behind the wheel just sitting there. Ethan noticed it on his way to grab the paper. He noticed it because he'd started noticing everything since Clara told him, started cataloging the street, the way she cataloged a building, and a strange truck with a running engine and a man just sitting in it did not belong. He didn't approach it. That was Clara's thing rubbing off on him. Don't escalate, observe, get the facts. He memorized the plate. He noted the time. He watched the truck sit there for 11 minutes, and then he watched it pull away when Clara's garage door started to open, timed perfectly, gone before she ever saw it, and Ethan stood in his driveway with the newspaper in his hand and felt something cold settle into his stomach, because that wasn't a coincidence. That was a man who left before he could be seen. That was a man who'd done this before. He didn't tell Clara that morning. He wanted to be sure. He spent the whole day chewing on it, and he called Mark, not for a hero plan, but because Mark was a firefighter who knew half the cops in town, and Ethan read him the plate and asked quiet, "Can you find out whose truck this is? No drama, I just need a name." "Ethan." Mark's voice changed, dropped the usual joke. "What's going on?" "I don't know yet. Maybe nothing. Can you get me the name?" "Yeah, give me a day." A pause. "This about the neighbor, the inspector?" "Just get me the name, Mark." He got the name the next afternoon. Mark called him from the station, and he wasn't joking at all anymore. "Truck's registered to a Victor Hale," Mark said. "Address is 140 miles out. Ethan, why is a guy from 140 miles away parking outside your neighbor's house at 7 in the morning? And Ethan standing in his workshop with sawdust on his hands, and his daughter's laughter drifting in from the yard where she was playing. Closed his eyes and understood that the thing Clara had been afraid of, the thing she'd tried to protect them from by disappearing, had already arrived. It was already here. It had been sitting across the street in a running truck, watching her garage door, and it had a name, and the name was real, and there was no more pretending it was fishing. "Mark," Ethan said, "I need you to do me one more favor, and I need you to not ask why yet. Can you do that?" "Yeah, I need you to be around this weekend. Close. Phone on." Ethan looked out at Lily, doing cartwheels in the grass at Clara's quiet house next door, at the empty spot across the street, where a truck had sat for 11 minutes waiting for a woman who'd done everything right and still couldn't get free. "Something's coming," he said. "I don't know what shape it's going to take, but it's coming, and when it gets here, I'm not going to be able to keep my promise to not fix it. So I'm going to need my best friend." He hung up, and that evening, when Clara came out to the fence with her phone and her tired eyes and her guard finally starting to come down a little more. Each night, Ethan looked at her across the boards they'd been talking over for a month, and he made the hardest decision he'd made in years. He decided to tell her about the truck. Not to fix it. To hand her the facts the way she'd want them, the plate and the time and the name, because she was an inspector, and she dealt in what was true, and she deserved the truth, even when the truth had a running engine and a man's name and had been parked 40 feet from her front door. "Clara," he said, "I've got something to tell you, and you're not going to like it, and I need you to know I'm telling you because you deal in facts, and you deserve the facts. Not because I'm trying to fix anything." She went very still. She knew that tone. She'd used that tone on 100 homeowners right before she told them their house wasn't safe to live in. "There was a truck," Ethan said, "yesterday morning, and I think other mornings too, across the street, a man just sitting in it watching your garage. He left the second your door started to open every time before you could see him." He said it steady, he said it clean, He gave her the facts, the way she gave people facts, and he watched the color drain out of her face. I got the plate. Clara, I had it run. He took a breath. The truck belongs to Victor Hale. Clara didn't say anything. She just reached out and gripped the top of the fence, both hands. Knuckles white, the same way she'd gripped the sink the morning of the message about Lily. And she stood there holding onto a fence in her own backyard, like it was the only solid thing left. And Ethan watched a woman who'd spent 6 years learning to hold heavy things without cracking come right up to the edge of cracking, and it was the worst thing he'd ever had to just stand and watch without fixing. "He's here," she whispered. "He's actually here. He's not 140 miles away sending messages. He drove here. He's been sitting outside my house." She looked up at Ethan, and her eyes were doing something he'd never seen them do, not crying worse than crying a kind of hunted stillness. "He watched my garage. He watched to see when I leave. Do you understand what that means? He's not trying to talk to me anymore. When they're just trying to talk, they knock on the door. When they sit in a truck and watch when you leave." She stopped. She was an inspector. She knew what a pattern of behavior meant when it stopped being about contact and started being about surveillance. "When they do that," Ethan said quietly, finishing the thing she couldn't, "it's not about you coming back anymore. It's about control. It was always about control." Clara let go of the fence. Something was changing in her right there in front of him, a decision forming. He could see it moving across her face like weather. The stillness was hardening into something else. The messages, the finding me, all of it. It was never about wanting me back. Victor doesn't want me back. Victor wants to know he can still reach me. He wants to know that no matter what I do, no matter how far I run, or how well I do without him, he can still put his hand on my life whenever he decides to. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing it's ever been. Her voice was getting steadier now, not softer, steadier, the way a voice gets when a person stops being afraid and starts being furious. "And I have spent 3 years letting him. Blocking numbers and moving towns and keeping my head down and telling myself the loving thing to do was disappear. Making myself smaller and smaller so he'd have less to grab onto. That's what he trained me to do. Shrink, and I did it. For 3 years I did exactly what he wanted." "Kishita my shoshgad." "Clara," he looked at your daughter. She said it flat and cold and final, the ice inspector all the way, but Ethan understood now that the ice had never been the absence of feeling. It was feeling under so much pressure, it had turned solid. He sat in a truck, and he watched to see when a woman leaves her house, so he could know her patterns 40 feet from where a 7-year-old does cartwheels in the yard. He made a child part of it. To scare me. He made your kid a tool to scare me. She looked at Ethan, and the hunted stillness was gone, burned clean off, and what was left in her eyes was something he'd been waiting a month to see her turn on anyone. "I'm done shrinking." Ethan didn't say anything. He'd promised not to fix it, and for the first time, he understood that he wasn't going to have to, because Clara Hayes wasn't a woman who needed fixing. She was a woman who'd been convinced for 6 years by a master that her strength was the thing wrong with her, and she'd just standing at a backyard fence with her hands shaking and her ex-boyfriend's truck haunting her street, remembered that it wasn't. "I need to make some calls," she said. "Tomorrow. First thing. A lawyer I should have called 3 years ago. And I need to document everything, every message, every number, the truck, the plate, the times, all of it. Because that's what I'm good at. That's the one thing that man could never take from me. I know how to build a case that holds." She was already somewhere else, already working the professional, coming back online with a vengeance. Then she stopped, and she looked at Ethan, and for just a second, the working stopped, and something bare showed through. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me, for handing it to me straight instead of hiding it to protect me. Everybody wants to protect me by keeping me in the dark. You're the first person who protected me by turning the lights on." "You deal in facts," Ethan said. "Seemed like you should have them." "I deal in facts," Clara agreed. And then she said the thing that changed everything between them. The thing that took it from a game to a bet, to a friendship, to whatever this was becoming. All in one sentence, delivered in that dry, flat voice that he'd stopped mistaking for cold a long time ago. You know the worst thing he ever did? Worse than the messages? Worse than the truck. She almost smiled, that rusty, broken almost smile. For 6 years he made me believe I'd have to face the ugly stuff alone, that I was too much for anyone to stand next to. And you stood next to it. You didn't even hesitate. You just stood next to the ugly stuff like it was nothing. Her voice caught. Nobody's ever done that. In my whole life. Nobody has ever once just stood next to it.
I'm not going anywhere, Ethan said. I keep telling you that. I don't know how to say it so you'll believe it. I'm starting to believe it.
Clara wiped her face with the back of her wrist, quick and impatient, like the tears were an inefficiency. That's the scary part. I'm starting to believe it, and Victor's sitting in a truck outside my house, and those two things are happening at the same time, and I don't get to fall apart about either one, because tomorrow I have to be smarter than a man who spent 6 years studying how to break me. She squared her shoulders. The wall wasn't up. That was the thing Ethan noticed, the thing he'd remember. She was standing there raw and scared and furious with no wall up at all, and she was still standing. So, I'm not going to fall apart, Clara said. I'm going to build a case, and I'm going to end his access to me for good. Not negotiate, not explain. End it. She looked at him. And I'd like you to be there, not to fix it, just to stand next to it. Since you're apparently the only person alive who knows how.
I'll be there, Ethan said.
Okay. Clara nodded once the way she nodded when a beam passed inspection final and certain. Okay. She turned to go inside, and then she stopped, one hand on the fence, and she said one more thing over her shoulder without looking back quiet enough that he almost missed it.
For the record, Clara said, you already won the bet. Weeks ago. The night you brought back the drawer. A pause. I just wasn't going to tell you because you'd have gotten a big head about it. And she went inside and her kitchen light came on, and through the window Ethan could see her sit down at the table and pull out a legal pad and start writing, building the case. Doing the one thing Victor Hale had never been able to take from her. And Ethan stood at the fence in the dark for a long time, watching the strongest person he'd ever met get ready to finally fight back, knowing that the truck would be back, knowing the man behind it had studied her for 6 years, and knowing that whatever was coming this weekend was going to test every true thing he'd ever said to her about not going anywhere. The legal pad had 4 pages filled by midnight, and Clara Hayes was on her 5th when the knock came at her front door, and it was not the knock of a neighbor. It was 3 slow raps, evenly spaced, patient. She knew that knock. She'd spent 6 years learning that knock. Victor never pounded. Pounding was for men who were losing control, and Victor was never losing control. That was the entire point of him. He knocked 3 times slow, like he had all the time in the world, like the door would open, because doors always eventually opened for him. Clara sat at her kitchen table with the pen frozen over the legal pad and every muscle in her body turned to stone. It was 12:40 in the morning. She did not get up. That was the first victory, though. It didn't feel like one, it felt like drowning. 3 years of training screamed at her to open the door, to manage him, to keep him calm, because a calm Victor was a Victor you could survive, and an inconvenienced Victor made you pay for weeks. Every instinct she'd built to stay alive inside that relationship told her the fastest way through this was to open the door and be small and be pleasant and get it over with. She picked up her phone instead. Her hands were shaking so badly it took her 2 tries to hit Ethan's name. He answered on the first ring. He hadn't been asleep. He'd told her he never slept, and it turned out that was going to matter. Clara? He's at my door. She kept her voice down to almost nothing. Right now. Victor. He's knocking on my front door and it's 1:45 in the morning. There was a sound on the other end, like a man already standing up. Don't open it, Ethan said. Are you hearing me? Do not open that door. I'm coming. Ethan, don't. If you come over here, it'll escalate. Clara. His voice was calm, and it was flat, and she realized the exact tone she used on people. The tone that said, I have already decided,
and I am not going to argue about it. I'm not coming over there to fight him. I gave you my word I wouldn't fix it, and I meant it. I'm coming, so you're not alone with him at your door at 1 in the morning, that's all. You don't have to be alone with this. Stay on the phone. The knock came again, 3 slow raps, and then Victor's voice through the door, pitched low and warm and reasonable, the voice that had narrated the destruction of 6 years of her life. Clara, I can see the lights on. I just want to talk. 5 minutes. You owe me 5 minutes after everything. Don't you think? Come on, don't make this weird. I drove all this way. She closed her eyes. That was the whole machine right there in 4 sentences. You owe me. Don't make this weird. Look what I did for you. Guilt. Then the reframe that any resistance was her being difficult, then the debt she never agreed to. She'd heard it 1,000 times, and it had worked 1,000 times, and the horror of it was that even now, even knowing exactly what it was, she could feel it reaching for the handholds it had worn into her over the years. Feel the old Clara wanting to rise up and open the door just to make the discomfort stop. I hear him, Ethan said in her ear. I'm coming out my front door right now. Keep the phone on. Don't say anything to him. You don't owe him a single word, Clara. Not one. She heard Ethan's front door open next door. She heard his footsteps on the walk. And through her own front door, she heard Victor go quiet. And then she heard him say in a completely different voice, the flat one, the one under the warm one. Who's that? That was the moment Clara understood something she'd never quite let herself see in 6 years. Victor wasn't afraid of her leaving. He'd proven that. She'd left, and he'd followed. Victor was afraid of witnesses. He was afraid of another person seeing the machine work because the machine only worked in private in the dark, in the space where it was just his word against her memory. The second, there was another adult standing on that walk. The whole thing changed, and she heard it change in his voice, heard the warmth drain out, and something colder and more careful take its place. Evening, Ethan said. She could hear him now through the door too close, calm, giving nothing. Help you with something? This doesn't concern you, friend. Victor's voice. This is between me and Clara, family business. Go back inside. See, I would, Ethan said, and there was something almost pleasant in how easy he sounded. Except it's 1 in the morning, and you're at a woman's door who didn't invite you, and I live right here, and that concerns me quite a bit, actually. So I'm going to stay right where I am. You have no idea what you're getting into. Victor quieter now. She'd tell you her side. She's good at her side. She's real good at making people think she's the one who got hurt. You want to know what it was actually like living with her? You want to know how many times No, Ethan said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't take the bait, didn't defend her, didn't argue because arguing was the door Victor was holding open, and Ethan wasn't dumb enough to walk through it. I don't want to know your version. I know her. That's enough. Now I've already called it in. My buddy's a firefighter. He's got friends who wear a different uniform, and one of them's on his way to do a welfare check on this address because there's a man at a woman's door at 1 in the morning who won't leave. So you've got about 4 minutes to be somewhere else, and I'd use them. That was a bluff about the timing and the truth about the call Ethan had texted Mark the second he hung up his own front door, and Mark, God bless him, had made exactly 1 phone call, and there was in fact a patrol car rolling. But Victor didn't know the timing was a bluff. And here is the thing about men like Victor Hale. They are cowards who have simply never been caught, and the entire architecture of their power depends on never being in a room with consequences. The word police did something to Victor that 6 years of Clara's tears never had. It made him leave. But he didn't leave quiet. They never leave quiet. Through the door, Clara heard him raise his voice for the first time in the entire encounter, and it wasn't at Ethan. It was aimed at the door. At her. You think this changes anything? Victor called. You think some handyman standing on a sidewalk changes what you are? I know you, Clara. I know exactly what you are. And in 6 months, when he figures it out too, when he sees the cold and the impossible, and the way you turn everything into a fight, you're gonna remember. I'm the only one who ever actually understood you and stayed. Nobody else is gonna stay. Nobody ever stays. You're gonna be right back where you—"
"She's not opening the door," Ethan said, cutting him clean off. "And you're out of minutes." There was a long silence. Then footsteps, unhurried deliberately. Unhurried, a man leaving on his own terms, so he could tell himself he chose to. A truck door. An engine. And then finally the sound Clara had been waiting 3 years to feel in her chest, the sound of Victor Hale driving away from her. She sat at her kitchen table, and she did not move for a full minute. "Clara!" Ethan's voice still in her ear, gentle now. "He's gone. I watched the truck turn off your street. I'm gonna stay out front till the patrol car comes through just so it's on record. You did it. You didn't open the door. Do you hear me? You didn't open the door." And Clara Hayes put her forehead down on her own kitchen table next to 5 pages of a legal pad, and she started to shake, not crying, just shaking the whole body, letting go of a terror it had been holding rigid for the better part of an hour, because he was right, and she couldn't believe he was right. She hadn't opened the door. For the first time in 6 years, Victor Hale had knocked, and she had not opened the door. "I didn't open it," she said into the table. "You didn't open it. I wanted to." "God, Ethan, you don't understand. I wanted to so bad, every part of me wanted to just open it and make it stop. But you didn't." His voice didn't waver. "You wanted to, and you didn't. That's not the absence of fear, Clara. That's the whole thing. That's courage. The other thing's just people who never got scared." She laughed wet and broken into the wood of the table. "You stole that. That's my line about the daycare." "Yeah, well, it was a good line. That was 1 a.m. on a Thursday, and it was the night everything turned. Though the turning didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival, which is a rougher and more honest thing." The patrol car came through 20 minutes later. Ethan spoke to the officer at the curb, gave the plate, the time, the pattern, all the facts Clara had taught him to gather without ever meaning to teach him, and the officer wrote it down and said the words "documented incident and pattern of behavior," and "you'll want to file for a protective order," and Clara, standing now in her own doorway, with a blanket around her shoulders because the shaking wouldn't fully stop, heard those words and felt something click into place. File for a protective order. Facts. Documentation. A case that holds. This she knew how to do. This was the one country where Victor had never been able to follow her, the country of what's provable, what's on record, what a level and a tape measure and a signed complaint can establish beyond his ability to reframe. He'd spent 6 years making her doubt her own memory. But you cannot gaslight a police report. You cannot make a woman doubt a timestamp. The officer left. Ethan walked her back to her door. He didn't come in. He never came in unless she asked, and she noticed it every single time, the way he stopped at the threshold of her, like she was a place he refused to enter without permission. "You should sleep," he said. "I'm not going to sleep." "No," he agreed. "Probably not." He stood there a second. "You want me to sit on my porch a while, not in your space. Just where I can see the street. In case." And Clara, who had spent 3 years and 140 miles building a life where she needed no one, where needing was the weakness Victor had taught her, it was looked at this quiet man offering to sit on his own porch in the dark, just so she wouldn't be watching an empty street alone. And she said the hardest word in her entire vocabulary. "Yes," she said. "Please." He sat on his porch until 4 in the morning. She watched him from her window, this stubborn furniture maker in a jacket and a lawn chair, not doing anything, not fixing anything, just being a witness on a dark street. And somewhere around 3, she stopped watching for the truck and started watching him. And she thought about the thing Victor had shouted through the door. "Nobody ever stays." And she looked at the man who had so far done nothing but stay, and she understood that Victor had been telling her about Victor the whole time. Men like that always are. When they tell you nobody will ever love you, what they mean is, I never did, and I need you to think that's the ceiling. She did not sleep, but she wasn't afraid either, which was almost stranger.
The next morning, 8 a.m. Friday, Clara called the lawyer she should have called 3 years ago. Her name was Denise Okafor, and Mark had gotten the referral through the same firefighter grapevine that had produced the license plate, and Denise Okafor had been doing domestic protective orders for 19 years and did not waste a single word. Clara laid it all out on the phone, the whole architecture of it, 6 years, and the leaving, and the messages, and the 3 block numbers, and the truck, and the knock at 12:40, and the exact words through the door. And she laid it out the way she'd lay out a structural failure, in order with evidence. No emotion in the delivery, because the emotion would have made it harder to be believed. And Clara had learned a long time ago that a woman is only believed when she sounds like she isn't feeling anything. Denise Okafor listened to the whole thing. And then she said something that broke Clara open worse than any kindness had. She said, "Ms. Hayes, everything you just described is textbook coercive control, and the fact that he never hit you is not going to make this harder in this state. As of 2 years ago, it makes it easier because the law finally caught up to what people like him actually do. You have a case. You have a real, documentable, winnable case. I need you to hear me say that because I've done this 19 years, and I can hear in your voice that some part of you still thinks you're going to open your file, and I'm going to tell you it wasn't that bad. It was that bad, and you have a case." Clara sat down. She hadn't realized she'd been standing. "It was that bad," she repeated. "It was that bad," Denise Okafor said. "Now let's build the thing that ends it." They built it over the next 4 days. And this is where Clara Hayes came all the way back to life, because building a case that holds was the thing she was born to do. And for the first time in 3 years, she got to point that terrible precision at the man who'd spent 6 years trying to convince her the precision was a defect. She pulled every message. She'd never deleted them. Some instinct, some inspector's instinct, had made her keep every single one across 3 phone numbers, screenshot and dated and backed up, and now that instinct paid off like a bond coming due. She had the truck plate. She had the timestamps. She had the police report from Thursday night and Ethan's statement and the officer's note about pattern of behavior. She had, it turned out, been documenting her own case for 3 years without letting herself know that's what she was doing, because part of her had always known this day would come, and part of her had refused to believe she'd ever be strong enough to use it. She was strong enough. She'd always been strong enough. That was the cruelest lie Victor ever told her, that her strength was the problem, when her strength was the only reason she'd survived him. Ethan didn't build the case with her. He'd promised not to fix it, and he understood that the case was the one thing she needed to do with her own 2 hands, because a protective order that someone else assembled for her would just be one more man managing her life, and she'd had enough of that to last 9 lifetimes. So, he did the other thing. He kept the world running while she worked. He picked Lily up from school so Clara could meet with Denise. He left plates of actual food on her porch because he'd figured out she forgot to eat when she was locked in. He fixed the carbon monoxide detector she still didn't have without being asked, and when she found it installed and mentioned it dry, "I told you not to inspect my house." He said, "I didn't inspect it. I just gave it a heart." And she laughed, and it was the first time she'd laughed since the knock. And Lily, this was the part that undid her, Lily started coming over. It happened by accident the first time. Ethan had Lily on a Saturday, and Clara came over to drop off a document Denise needed signed. And Lily was at the kitchen table with a fresh drawing. And she looked up at the terrifying ice inspector standing in her father's kitchen, and said with the total fearlessness of a 7-year-old, "You're the mean neighbor. I drew you a horse. Daddy said it looks like a couch, but it's definitely a horse." And Clara, who had spent 6 years being told by Victor that she was too broken, too cold, too difficult to ever be trusted around a child who had flinched at the word daughter, like it was a wound, because Victor had aimed his cruelest artillery at exactly the family he'd convinced her she'd only ruin. Clara knelt down at the kitchen table and looked at the drawing and said with complete seriousness, "It's a horse. Your dad's wrong. This is clearly a horse. The couch people don't know what they're talking about." Lily beamed like the sun had come up. And Ethan, standing at the counter, had to turn around and look very hard at the coffee maker for a second because he'd just watched the thing Victor had tried hardest to kill in Clara come roaring back to life in the space of one sentence to a 7-year-old, and it was almost too much to watch straight on. The order was filed on the following Wednesday 9 a.m., exactly 1 week after the knock. Denise Okafor walked it through, and it was granted temporarily pending the hearing, and there would be a hearing and Victor would be served, and at the hearing, Clara would have to stand in a room and say all of it out loud in front of a judge, and possibly in front of Victor himself. And she knew that, and she was terrified of that, and she did it anyway. But Victor Hale was not a man who accepted the country of what's provable. Victor lived in the country of his own version, and men like that do not go quietly into a system that deals in facts, because facts are the one thing they've spent their whole lives escaping. So when the temporary order was granted, when the machine of documentation and law and timestamp finally closed around him, Victor did the thing that cornered men in his position always do. The thing that is, somehow, always a surprise, even though it shouldn't be. He stopped going after Clara, and he started going after Ethan. It began small and sideways the way Victor did everything. A 1-star review appeared on Ethan's small business listing from an account with no history, describing shoddy work and a dishonest, aggressive craftsman who shouldn't be trusted in your home around your family. Then another. Then a third. Ethan's phone, which rang maybe twice a week with new furniture jobs, went silent, and when a client he'd been about to start a big built-in for called to cancel uncomfortable, saying he'd heard some things, Ethan understood exactly what was happening, and he understood who was doing it. And for the first time in the whole ordeal, Ethan Cole felt his own temper come off its leash. Because here was the thing about Victor's move, the thing that made it worse than the truck he'd found. The one pressure point Ethan couldn't just absorb with his usual quiet steadiness. Ethan didn't care about being called a liar. But Ethan was a single father whose entire ability to feed his daughter and keep the lights on and put a roof over Lily's head ran through a small business built on his reputation in a small town. And Victor, who studied people. That was his one genuine talent. Studying people to find the handle, had found the exact handle. He'd gone after Ethan's ability to provide for his child. Ethan sat in his workshop the night the third job canceled, and he looked at his tools, his father's chisels, the only inheritance he'd ever gotten. And he thought about driving 140 miles to have a conversation with Victor Hale that would end Ethan's freedom and prove Victor right about him in one motion, and it was the closest he'd come in years to becoming the thing his father had been. Clara found him like that. She came out to the fence at 9 like always, and he wasn't there, and the garage light was on, but he wasn't working. He was just sitting on his workbench in the dark with his hands hanging between his knees. And she came into his garage, uninvited for the first time ever, which was its own kind of statement. "I know what he did," she said. "The reviews." Denise flagged them. "Ethan, I am so sorry. This is exactly what I was afraid of. This is why I pulled away. This is the thing I—" "Don't." Ethan's voice was rough, not at her, at everything. "Don't you dare apologize for what he did. That's his, not yours. He's costing you jobs. He's coming after Lily's—" "I know what he's coming after." Ethan looked up at her, and Clara saw something in his face she'd never seen there. The steadiness cracked for once, and it scared her more than Victor ever had, because Ethan cracked was a wrongness in the order of the world. "I've been sitting here 2 hours thinking about getting in my truck and driving out there. And I know that's exactly what he wants. I know he's poking me, because a guy who loses his temper and shows up at his door is a guy Victor can finally point at and say, 'See, he's dangerous. I'm the victim here.' I know that's the trap. I've known it for 2 hours. And I'm still sitting here thinking about it because he's going after my kid's future. And there's a thing in me." He stopped. His jaw worked. "There's a thing in me from my old man that I've spent my whole life sitting on, and Victor just found the one lever that lifts it." And Clara Hayes did for Ethan Cole in that garage the exact thing he had done for her at 1 a.m. on Thursday. She didn't fix it. She sat down on the workbench next to him close, and she didn't tell him to calm down. And she didn't tell him it would be okay. And she didn't reach for a solution, because she finally understood, standing on the other side of it, that the solution was never the point. She just put herself next to the ugly thing. "You're not going to drive out there," she said. Not a question. A fact stated the way she stated facts with total certainty. "You're not going to, and I'll tell you how I know. You already sat here for 2 hours not doing it. You said it yourself about me at the door wanting to and not doing it. That's the whole thing. You've been wanting to and not doing it for 2 hours. That's not a man about to lose it. That's a man winning a fight nobody can see." Ethan let out a breath that was half a laugh. "You stole my line back." It was a good line. She bumped her shoulder against his. "And we're not going to fight him the way he fights. We're never going to win in the mud. That's his home field. He's been living in the mud for 6 years. We're going to beat him in the one room he can't win in. The one with a judge in it and a stack of documented facts and a timestamp for every single thing he's ever done." She pulled out her phone. "Those reviews. Fake accounts, no purchase history posted within the same 48-hour window, all echoing language from the messages he sent me. That's not a disaster, Ethan. That's evidence. He just handed me a pattern of retaliation against a witness in an active protective order case in writing timestamped from accounts I can subpoena." She was smiling now, and it was the terrible, precise smile of the ICE inspector finding a violation that was going to shut the whole site down. "He thinks he's punishing you. What he actually did was strengthen my case and add a count. He can't help it. He can't stop putting things in writing. Control freaks never can. They have to narrate." Ethan looked at her, at this woman who had walked into his garage in the middle of his worst hour, and instead of comfort, handed him the one thing that actually reached him, which was a way through that didn't require him to become his father, and he felt the leashed thing in his chest lie back down. "You're really good at this," he said quietly. "I'm the best there is at this," Clara said, with no false modesty at all, because it was true, and they both knew it, and it was maybe the first time in 3 years she'd said something good about herself out loud. "Victor spent 6 years telling me being good at this made me cold. It doesn't make me cold, Ethan. It makes me the person who's going to end him. Watch." And Ethan Cole, sitting in his dark garage with his father's chisels and his canceled jobs, and his daughter asleep in the house, looked at the woman beside him and understood that the bet had not just been won weeks ago, it had been the wrong frame entirely. He hadn't won her. Nobody won Clara Hayes. She wasn't a prize at the end of a game. She was a person who had climbed out of a pit with her own 2 hands, and the most he had ever done. The best thing he had ever done was refuse to be one more person shoving her back down into it. "Okay," he said. "Then let's beat him in the room with the judge. We will." Clara stood up. She held out her hand to pull him off the workbench, and he took it, and neither of them let go quite as fast as they needed to. "But first, you're going to eat something because I can see from here you haven't, and then you're going to sleep because tomorrow I need you sharp. Denise wants your statement about the truck and the door notarized, and I want you thinking clearly when you give it." She paused at the garage door, and the dry, flat delivery came back, but there was something warm running underneath it now, something that had stopped hiding. "And Ethan, the thing your dad put in you, the lever." She looked at him. "You've been sitting on it your whole life, and it's never once gotten loose. Not once. You know what that makes you, the opposite of him. He never fought the thing in himself a single day. You fight it every day, and you win every day, and you've been doing it so long you don't even know it's a fight anymore." Her voice went quiet. "That's the man I led over my wall. Not the one who never got angry, the one who gets angry and stays good anyway. That's harder. That's the whole thing." She went home. Ethan ate. Ethan slept. And in the morning he gave his statement clear and true, and notarized one more time-stamped brick in the wall Clara was building around Victor Hale, a wall 3 feet thick, and rated this time not for seismic events, but for the specific and permanent purpose of keeping one man out of 2 lives forever. The hearing was set for 18 days out. Victor would be served within the week. And somewhere 140 miles away, a man who had spent 6 years and 3 phone numbers and 1 long drive believing he could always put his hand back on Clara Hayes's life whenever he chose, was about to receive a document informing him that the woman he'd trained to shrink had instead built a case that holds, and that she had not built it alone. Victor Hale was served on a Tuesday afternoon, and the machine of him broke down in exactly the way Clara had predicted it would, which was not with rage, but with reasonableness, the most dangerous version of him there was. She knew it was coming the moment the messages changed shape again. For 3 days after he was served there was nothing. Silence. And Clara, who had lived inside the weather system of this man for 6 years, understood that the silence was not surrender. The silence was Victor recalculating. And on the 4th day, 7 p.m. on a Saturday, the new approach arrived, and it was so precisely engineered that even knowing exactly what it was, Clara felt it land. It didn't come to her phone. That would have violated the temporary order, and Victor was many things. But he was not careless about the specific rules that could put him in a cell. It came through a mutual acquaintance from her old city, a woman named Renata, who Clara had thought of as a friend, once before she understood that Victor collected people, and Renata was one of the people he'd kept in the divorce. Renata called warm and worried, and said Victor had reached out to her devastated. And did Clara know how bad he was doing? He wasn't sleeping. He'd lost weight. He kept saying he just wanted a chance to apologize, that he knew he'd made mistakes, that he'd been in therapy. Actual therapy. Clara real work. And that all he wanted was 5 minutes to say he was sorry. And then he'd never contact her again. He swore it, he just couldn't live with how they'd left things. And Clara stood in her kitchen holding the phone and felt 6 years of trained instinct rise up in one smooth wave and nearly take her under. Because this was the masterpiece. This was Victor at the height of his craft. He hadn't sent the message himself. He'd sent it through a sympathetic voice, so that saying no meant not just rejecting Victor, but disappointing Renata, becoming the cold woman who wouldn't even let a broken man apologize. He'd wrapped the whole thing in the language of growth and therapy and accountability, the exact language Clara had spent 3 years wishing he would use, so that refusing it meant refusing the very change she'd prayed for. He'd made saying no feel like cruelty. He'd made her boundary feel like the thing wrong with her. That was the entire 6-year project in a single phone call. Your self-protection is your character flaw. He's really trying, Clara, Renata said gently. People can change. Don't you think everyone deserves a chance to say they're sorry? And here is the moment the whole story had been building toward, though it didn't look like a climax, because the real ones rarely do. Clara opened her mouth to say the old thing, the trained thing, maybe 5 minutes, maybe, if it's supervised. Maybe I owe him that. She could feel the words assembling in her throat, worn smooth by 6 years of use. And then she thought about Ethan sitting on his porch until 4 a.m, and Lily saying, "It's definitely a horse," and Denise Okafor saying it was that bad, and the $20 bill on her refrigerator next to a child's drawing, and she closed her mouth. And she did the thing she had never once done in her entire life. She did not explain. "No," Clara said. There was a silence on the line. Renata had been ready for negotiation for the long, soft conversation where Clara justified herself and Renata gently argued, and eventually Clara gave a little because that was the shape every one of these conversations had ever taken. But Clara didn't justify. She didn't launch into the 6 years. She didn't defend her no or soften it or apologize for it or hang a single word of reasoning on it that Victor could later use as a handle. "No," she said again. "Renata, I want you to hear me because I'm only going to say this once and then I'm going to hang up. There is a court order. Victor knows there's a court order. He is using you to get around it, which means he has already pulled you into something you don't understand, and I'd get out of the middle of it if I were you. I'm not going to meet him. Not for 5 minutes, not supervised, not ever. And I'm not going to tell you why, because the why is the trap. Every time I explain, he finds a way in through the explanation. So there's no explanation. There's just no. A breath. Tell him whatever you want. Or tell him nothing. But this is the last time my name and his are going to be in the same phone call. Take care of yourself, Renata. And she hung up. Her hands were shaking. But she'd done it. She'd been handed the single most sophisticated version of the trap that had held her for 6 years, delivered by a sympathetic friend, wrapped in the language of therapy and growth and second chances. And she had said no, without explaining. Which meant she had finally taken away the one tool Victor had never been able to function without her participation. He could only reframe an argument. He could not reframe a closed door. You cannot gaslight silence. There's nothing in it to twist. She stood in her kitchen for a long moment, and then she started to laugh quietly alone because she'd just realized something. For 6 years, she'd thought the goal was to convince Victor to stop, to finally say the right combination of words that would make him understand, make him agree, make him release her. And the entire time, the release had never required his agreement at all. It had only required her to stop showing up to the argument. The door had been unlocked from her side the whole time. She just hadn't believed she was allowed to walk through it. She called Denise Okafor and reported the Renata contact, third-party contact, to circumvent a protective order documented time-stamped another brick. Then she walked next door, and when Ethan opened it, she didn't stand on the threshold this time. She walked in. She'd never walked in without an invitation before, and Ethan noticed it the way he noticed everything about her. And he didn't say a word about it because he understood it was a sentence she was speaking with her feet. He tried again, she said, through a friend. The full masterpiece therapy language, second chances the whole thing, designed so that saying no made me the villain. She was still lit up, still half laughing with the disbelief of it. Ethan, I said no. I didn't explain. I just said no and hung up. 6 years, and I never once did that. Do you understand what that I didn't explain? And Ethan Cole did something then that surprised them both. He didn't say good job or I'm proud of you or any of the small applauding things. He just looked at her for a second, and then his face did something complicated, and he said rough, "You have no idea what you look like right now, do you? You've been walking around this whole time thinking the cold and the strict and the difficult is what people see. And I'm standing here looking at the actual bravest person I've ever met in my life, and you don't even—" He stopped. He shook his head. "You don't even know." Clara's laugh died into something quieter. "Say it," she said, not a challenge, almost a plea. "Whatever you're not saying, say it. I'm tired of everybody deciding what I can handle. Say the thing." And Ethan, who had spent 6 weeks refusing to move faster than she was ready for, who had stopped at the threshold of her 100 times, looked at the woman standing in the middle of his kitchen, having just walked in under her own power, and decided she was finally ready to hear the true thing, because she'd just proven she could hold anything. "I'm in love with you," he said, "and it's got nothing to do with a bet. And it's got nothing to do with saving you because you don't need saving, you just proved that on the phone. I fell for you somewhere around the drawer, honestly, and I've been holding it because you had a war to fight, and I wasn't going to hand you one more thing to manage in the middle of it. But you walked into my house on your own 2 feet just now, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend I don't. I love you. That's the thing I wasn't saying." The kitchen went very quiet, and Clara Hayes, who had a response ready for every situation, who dealt in facts and timestamps and things you could measure with a level, stood in Ethan Cole's kitchen and had absolutely nothing. For once in her life, the precise machine of her had no output at all. Because Victor had spent 6 years teaching her that love was the bait on the trap, that when a man said he loved you, it was the opening move in a long, slow campaign to own you. And she stood there, waiting for the trap to spring, waiting for the butt, waiting for the cost, the way she'd waited her entire adult life. And it didn't come. There was no but. There was just a tired furniture maker in his own kitchen who'd said the thing and then stopped talking, not pressing, not closing in, not needing an answer, just standing there having told the truth the way he always told the truth and letting her do whatever she was going to do with it. "You're not going to ask me to say it back," she said. It came out almost accusing. "No." "Why not?" "Because you're not ready, and I'm not going to make you perform something you're not ready for just so I feel better," Ethan said. "I've watched you get bullied into things for 6 weeks by a guy who made you explain yourself for 6 years. I'm not gonna be one more person who needs you to produce a feeling on demand. I said it because it's true, and you should have the fact of it. What you do with it is yours. And that, God help her, that was the thing that finally did it. The thing that got all the way through the wall to the part of Clara that Victor had spent 6 years walling off. Not the "I love you." The "you don't have to say it back." The love with no invoice attached. The first time in her adult life a man had handed her something, and not in the same breath started counting what she owed him for it. She crossed the kitchen and she kissed him. And it wasn't the movies. It wasn't fireworks. It was something better and quieter and more terrifying. It was a woman who had learned to expect a trap behind every open hand, choosing to walk through the open hand anyway. Choosing to believe against 6 years of evidence that this one time it might just be a hand. When she pulled back, she had tears on her face, and she was furious about it, wiping them away with the back of her wrist in that impatient way she had. "I'm not saying it back yet," she warned him. "I know, not because I don't. Because the last person I said it to used it against me for 6 years, and I need it to mean what it's supposed to mean when I say it. Not be one more thing I hand somebody so they'll stop being disappointed in me. When I say it, it's going to be clean. Do you understand? It's going to be the cleanest thing I ever said." "Take all the time you need," Ethan said. "I've got a stuck drawer that took 6 days. I'm a patient man." She laughed, wet and broken and real, and pressed her forehead against his chest. And for a moment the war and the hearing, and Victor and all of it fell away, and there were just 2 people in a kitchen who'd each climbed out of a different pit and found each other on the far side of it. That was 8 p.m. on a Saturday, 9 days before the hearing. The 9 days were not quiet. Victor cut off from Clara through every direct channel blocked from third-party contact the moment Denise filed the Renata incident, did the last thing available to a cornered man who cannot stand to lose the argument. He escalated where he thought no one was watching. He couldn't reach Clara. He couldn't legally reach Clara. So, on the Thursday before the hearing, 3 p.m. while Lily was at school and Ethan was at a job site, and Clara was at the county building, doing an inspection, Victor Hale drove 140 miles one more time, and he did not go to Clara's house. He went to Lily's school. Ethan got the call at 3:15. It was the school office, calm but firm, the specific calm of people trained not to cause panic, saying there was a man in the front office asking to pick up Lily Cole, saying he was a family friend that Clara Hayes had sent him, that there'd been an emergency. The office had not released Lily. They didn't have him on the authorized list. They'd followed protocol. Lily was safe in her classroom, but the man was still there, insisting, getting agitated. And did Mr. Cole know of Victor Hale? Ethan was in his truck before the woman finished the sentence. And here is where the whole story turned on its hinge, because in the 11 minutes it took Ethan to drive from the job site to the school, breaking every speed law Clara had ever enforced, the old lever came all the way off the leash. The thing his father had put in him, the thing he'd sat on his whole life, the thing Victor had been poking at with the reviews. It came loose completely because this was not about Ethan anymore, and it was not about jobs. This was a man who studied people for a living, using a 7-year-old as a lever to hurt the woman he couldn't otherwise reach, and every good and gentle thing in Ethan Cole burned off in 11 minutes on the highway and left behind something that fully intended to put Victor Hale in the ground. He called Clara on his way. He shouldn't have been able to talk. His hands were shaking on the wheel, but he called her because he'd promised her once that he'd turn the lights on instead of keeping her in the dark, and even now, even losing it, he kept that promise. Clara. His voice was not his voice. He's at Lily's school. He tried to sign her out. She's safe. The school stopped him. She's safe. But he's there. He's still there. And I'm 8 minutes out. And Clara, I have to tell you the truth. I don't know what I'm going to do when I get there. I don't. I've been the guy who sits on it my whole life, and I can feel it coming off, and I don't know if I can... Ethan. Clara's voice came through the phone, and it was the flattest, calmest, most absolute he had ever heard it. The ice inspector at full power, and it cut straight through the red noise in his head. Listen to me. Listen. He went to the school for exactly one reason. not to take her. He was never going to get her. He knew the school would stop him. He's not stupid. He went so that you would do exactly what you're doing right now. He wants you to show up hot. He wants a scene. He wants you to put your hands on him in front of a school full of witnesses 9 days before a hearing so that he can stand in front of that judge and say, look what kind of man she brought around a child. Look how dangerous he is. I'm the victim. I was only trying to check on the little girl and he attacked me. That is the entire plan. The school is bait. Lily was never the target, Ethan. You are. You've been the target since the reviews. Do you understand me? Ethan's hands were white on the wheel. He used my kid. He used your kid to reach for the one thing he had left, which is making you into the monster so he can be the victim. And if you walk in there and give it to him, he wins. Not the case. The case is still ours. But he wins the thing he actually came for, which is proving to himself that everyone becomes what he needs them to be if he pushes the right lever. You've spent your whole life proving him wrong about that without even knowing his name. Don't hand it to him now, not 8 minutes from the finish line. The truck was doing 80. Ethan's whole body was one clenched muscle. How do I not? He said, and it came out cracked. It came out like something breaking. Clara, how do I get there, and not? He went after my daughter. How am I supposed to? Because Lily is going to see it, Clara said, and that stopped him. That reached in past the lever, and past the red, and past the thing his father left him, and it stopped him cold because it was true, and it was the only thing in the world that could have been true enough. She's going to be at the window, Clara said, quiet and relentless. Or they're going to bring her out to you, and she's going to see her dad in the parking lot. And whatever she sees, that's the dad she's going to have for the rest of her life. If she sees you put your hands on a man, that's who you are to her forever. And if she sees you walk in calm and stand between her and him and let the police handle it because I've already called them Ethan, they're rolling. I called the second you told me if she sees that, then the dad she gets is the one who stayed good with a monster in front of him. That's the whole inheritance. That's the only thing you actually get to leave her. Your dad left you a lever and a set of chisels. You get to choose what you leave Lily. And you get to choose it in the next 7 minutes. Ethan drove the last 7 minutes with tears running down his face, and both hands locked on the wheel, and Clara on the speaker the entire way. Not hanging up. Not letting him be alone with it for 1 single second. Doing for him at the worst moment of his life. Exactly what he had done for her at 1 a.m. on a Thursday, standing next to the ugly thing, refusing to let him carry it by himself, and being the witness that made staying good possible. He pulled into the school lot at 3:26. Victor was still there, standing near the front doors, and the second he saw Ethan's truck come in hot. Clara was proven right in the ugliest possible way, because Victor's face changed. It relaxed. He'd been waiting. He turned slightly, angling himself so that the front office windows had a clear view, positioning for the shot, already composing the scene he was going to describe to the judge. He wanted Ethan to come at him. Every line of his body was an invitation to be hit. And Ethan Cole got out of his truck and he did not go to Victor. He walked past him, close enough to touch. Close enough that every cell in his body screamed to close the last 2 feet. And he walked past Victor Hale like he was a fence post, and he went to the front doors, and through the glass, he could see Lily standing with a teacher. Her face pressed to the window watching. And Ethan crouched down on the other side of the glass, so he was at her level, and he put his hand flat on the door, and he smiled at his daughter, smiled with everything in him on fire, so that the first thing she saw, the thing she'd carry forever, was her dad coming to get her calm, safe hers. Hey baby, he mouthed through the glass. You okay? And Lily nodded and put her small hand up against the glass over his. And that was the moment Ethan Cole beat Victor Hale, not in a courtroom, not with his fists, but in a school parking lot, with a pane of glass between his hand and his daughter's choosing what to leave her. Behind him, Victor was saying something. Ethan didn't hear it. He'd stopped being available to Victor entirely. And that the not being available, the closed door, the refusal to show up to the argument was the exact weapon Clara had used, passed from her hands to his in the space of an 11-minute phone call. And when the patrol cars pulled in 90 seconds later, lights going, they found a man loitering at an elementary school in violation of a protective order that had specific language about the safety of minors in the protected party's household. And they found a father crouched calm at a glass door with his daughter. And they found the whole thing documented before they even arrived, because Clara had called it in with times and names, and the exact statute, because Clara built cases that hold. Victor Hale was arrested in the parking lot of Lily's elementary school at 3:29 p.m. on the Thursday before the hearing. It was Denise. Okafor would say later, the single stupidest thing a respondent had ever done 9 days out from a protective order hearing in her 19 years of practice, and she had seen some stupid things. He'd violated the order. At a school. In front of staff witnesses. Trying to remove a child he had no relationship to. There would be no more hearing about whether the order should be permanent. There would now be a hearing about the criminal violation, and the protective order would be granted permanent, almost as an afterthought, and Victor Hale had done what cornered men who cannot stand to lose. The argument always eventually do, he had reached so hard for control that he'd handed away the last of it with both hands. Ethan brought Lily home. She was fine, more curious than scared, full of questions about why the police came, and Ethan answered them honestly at a 7-year-old's level, because that was the kind of father he'd decided in a parking lot to keep being. And when Clara came over that night, Lily ran to her, and Clara knelt down and caught her, and looked up at Ethan over the little girl's shoulder with an expression he'd never seen on her before. Something cracked wide open and unguarded and unafraid. Later, after Lily was asleep, Clara and Ethan sat at his kitchen table, and neither of them said much because there wasn't much to say that the day hadn't already said. Finally, Clara reached across the table and took his hand, the hand that had stayed flat against a glass door, instead of becoming a fist, and she held it. "You walked past him," she said quietly. "I heard it on the phone. You walked right past him. You told me to. I told you to. You still had to do it." She turned his hand over, looked at it. "Do you know how many men would have walked past him after the school, after the reviews, after all of it?" She shook her head. "None. 0. I've spent my whole career around men who can't walk past a challenge to save their lives. You walked past the man who used your daughter as bait, because a 7-year-old was watching." Her voice went rough. "That's the cleanest thing I ever saw anybody do. I almost didn't." "Almost doesn't count against you. Almost and not doing it," she started. "Is the whole thing?" he finished. "Yeah, I've heard." And Clara Hayes looked at Ethan Cole across a kitchen table at the end of the worst and best day, and she opened her mouth and she thought about 6 years and 140 miles and a wall 3 feet thick, and she thought about a man who said "I love you," and then said, "You don't have to say it back." And she found that the thing she'd been holding, the clean thing, the thing she wanted to mean exactly what it was supposed to mean. She found it was finally ready, finally clean, finally hers to give with no invoice and no trap and no cost. But she didn't say it yet. Not there. Not at the end of a day with sirens in it. She wanted it clean, and clean meant its own moment uncontaminated by Victor's last worst act. So she just held his hand, and she smiled, the real one, the one she'd spent the whole story learning to let people see, and she said, "Soon, I promise. When it's clean. You'll know it when you hear it." And Ethan Cole, patient man, holder of stuck drawers, and steady. In the worst hours, squeezed her hand and believed her because she had never once lied to him, and because some things are worth waiting for the clean version of. The permanent order was granted on a Wednesday morning, and it took the judge 4 minutes, and Clara Hayes did not cry until she got to the parking lot. She'd stood in that courtroom expecting a fight, expecting to have to say all 6 years out loud, expecting Victor to be there with his reasonable face and his growth language and his sympathetic tilt of the head. But Victor wasn't there. Victor was dealing with the criminal charge from the school, and his lawyer had advised him correctly for once that showing up to contest a protective order while facing a charge for violating that same order at an elementary school was the kind of thing that made judges remember your name. So the courtroom was nearly empty. Denise Okafor laid out the case that holds the timestamps and the messages and the truck and the third-party contact and the school, all of it in order, all of it documented. And the judge looked at the stack of it and looked at Clara and said the order was granted permanent, 5 years minimum with automatic renewal review, and that was it. 4 minutes. 6 years ended in 4 minutes because Clara Hayes had spent 3 of those years quietly building the one thing Victor could never argue with. She held it together through the thank yous to Denise. She held it together through the elevator. And then she got to her truck in the parking lot, and she sat down behind the wheel, and she put both hands over her face, and she cried the way you cry when something you'd been carrying for 6 years finally gets set down. Not sad, not even really relief. Just the body finally allowed to let go of a weight it had forgotten wasn't part of it. Ethan was waiting by his own truck 3 spaces down. He'd come, of course. He hadn't come into the courtroom she'd asked him not to. She'd wanted to face the last of Victor as herself, standing on her own, the way she'd needed to build the case with her own hands. But he'd come to the parking lot, and he'd waited, and when he saw her sit down in her truck and put her face in her hands, he didn't rush over. He waited until she was done. He'd learned that about her a long time ago, that she needed to finish a thing before anyone touched it. When she finally got out of the truck, her face was wrecked and clean at the same time, and she walked over to him and she said, "It's done. 5 years. Permanent." And then before he could say anything, "And Denise says with the school charge on top, if he so much as drives through this county, I get a phone call and he gets a cell." He's done, Ethan. He's actually done. I keep waiting to not believe it. You can believe it, Ethan said. You built it. It holds. I built it. She agreed, and something in her stood a little taller saying it. That was a Wednesday in late August. And the strange thing about the weeks that followed, the thing Clara kept noticing with a kind of wonder, was how quiet they were. She'd spent 6 years braced for the next thing, and 3 years after that, braced for Victor to find her, and now there was no next thing. Just mornings. Just her job, which she was better at than ever, because it turned out that a woman who stopped spending half her energy defending her own worth has a lot more of it left over for load calculations. Just Ethan at the fence at night. Just Lily, who had decided that Clara was hers now, and who reported this decision to Clara directly. One afternoon by handing her a new drawing. This one unmistakably a house with 3 stick figures in front of it. 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 small, and a caption in 7-year-old handwriting that said, "Our house." Clara had to sit down on the porch step when she saw that one. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Lily, who are the 3 people?" "That's Daddy. That's me. That's you." Lily pointed matter-of-fact, like she was explaining something obvious to a slightly slow adult. "You're the medium one." "I'm the medium one," Clara repeated. "Is that okay? I can make you taller if you want." "No," Clara said, and her voice did something. "No, baby. Medium is perfect. I'll take medium." And that was the moment Clara Hayes understood that Victor had been wrong about the biggest thing of all, not just that she was too cold to love, but that she was too broken to be trusted around a child that she'd only ruin any family she got near. She'd carried that one the deepest and hidden it the best. It was why she'd flinched at the word daughter all those weeks ago, like it was a wound. And here was the daughter in question, drawing her into the house, calling her the medium one, deciding she belonged there with the total unbothered certainty that only a 7-year-old can manage. Victor had spent 6 years telling her she'd poison a family. And a little girl who drew horses that looked like couches had looked at Clara Hayes and simply permanently decided otherwise. She kept that drawing. She put it on her refrigerator next to the couch horse and the $20 bill, and the 3 of them together told the whole story of the summer, if you knew how to read them. She told Ethan she loved him on a Tuesday. She'd promised it would be clean, and it was. It wasn't at the end of a hard day. It wasn't in the wreckage of anything. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening. Nothing happening, the 2 of them at the fence like always. And Lily was inside doing homework, and Ethan was telling some long, pointless story about a client who wanted a dining table built out of a barn door, and Clara was only half listening, because she was watching his hands move while he talked. the way they always moved when he talked about wood, and she thought with the sudden total clarity of a load calculation coming out, "Even this is the cleanest I have ever felt in my life." "Ethan," she said, interrupting the barn door story, "I love you." He stopped mid-sentence. "I've loved you for weeks," she said. "Probably since the smoke detector. Maybe since the drawer, if I'm honest. But I wasn't going to admit the drawer because you'd get a big head. I didn't say it because I wanted it to be clean. I wanted it to mean the thing it's supposed to mean and not be something I hand you. So you'll stop being disappointed in me, because that's what it always was, before it was always a payment. And I needed to know I could say it as a gift instead of a payment." She took a breath. "It's a gift. This is me finding out I can still give it. I love you, clean, no invoice." That's the whole sentence. Voice. Ethan looked at her over the fence for a long moment. Then he said, "Was it the drawer?" And Clara laughed. Really laughed. The rusty, broken thing all the way healed now into something easy, and she reached over the fence and grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him in and kissed him. And somewhere in the house, a 7-year-old who was supposed to be doing homework was watching through the window and would report the entire incident at dinner with great satisfaction. They didn't rush anything after that. That was the thing about the two of them. They'd both learned the hard way. What happens when you let someone rush you? So they moved at the speed of two people who had all the time in the world and no interest in wasting it, proving anything to anyone. Ethan's business came back. It turned out the fake reviews got scrubbed once Denise sent a very professional letter, and the clients who'd canceled came back sheepish, and a couple of them came back with bigger jobs out of guilt, which Ethan accepted with grace and slightly inflated invoices. Clara kept inspecting buildings and shutting down the ones that needed shutting down, and she stopped flinching when the contractors called her the ice inspector, because she'd finally understood that the name was a compliment wearing an insult's clothes. It meant she was the one who couldn't be talked out of the truth, and there were worse things to be. And then it was September, and Mark Cole, who had spent the entire summer alternating between mortified guilt over the bet and enormous pride at how it had turned out, and who had appointed himself the unofficial mascot of the whole romance, decided they needed to go back to the beginning. "Same backyard," Mark announced, showing up at Ethan's on a Saturday. "Same table, same grill. We're doing it. Full circle. I started this thing, I'm gonna finish it right." "You didn't start anything," Ethan said. "You made a stupid bet and she took your $20. I started the whole thing. You'd never have talked to her if I hadn't. She fixed my drawer. That started it. The drawer only mattered because of the bet." "You two are exhausting," Clara said, walking up. "Fine. Cookout. Same backyard. But Mark," she pointed at him, "if you make one more bet in my presence, I'm going to red tag your grill for the improper propane connection I've been ignoring all summer out of politeness." Mark went pale. "You've been the connection's fine. The connection's a code violation, and you know it. Cook the ribs. Behave." So they did it. Same backyard where it all started, the June barbecue run back in September. Same people, same table, same grill, with its questionable propane connection. Mark cooked. Lily ran around the yard with a couple of other neighborhood kids. The evening got long and golden and easy, in the way that late summer evenings do. And at some point, Mark, who could never leave a moment alone, tapped his beer bottle with a fork, like he was about to give a wedding toast. "I want to say something," Mark announced. "Please don't," said Ethan. "I want to say something. 3 months ago, right here at this exact table, I bet my best friend $20 he couldn't win over the scary neighbor." Mark put his hand over his heart. "And I want to formally admit that I have never been so wrong or so right about anything in my entire life. I lost the bet." "You didn't lose a bet. There was no bet," Ethan said. "I lost the bet," Mark continued, ignoring him. "Because you two are clearly disgustingly in love, which means I win, which means you owe me $20, Ethan. That's not how it— and I'd like to collect." And that was when Ethan Cole stood up. He reached into his back pocket and he pulled out a $20 bill. A specific 20, the one Clara had lifted off the same table 3 months ago and stuck under a magnet on her refrigerator, the one she'd handed back to him weeks later saying, "Hold on to this, it's yours. You earned it the hard way." And he set it down on the table in the exact spot where Mark had slapped it down in June. And the whole yard got quiet because there was something in the way he did it, something deliberate that told everyone this wasn't about Mark's joke anymore. "This was never a bet," Ethan said. He wasn't looking at Mark, he was looking at Clara. "That's the thing I need to say, and I'm only going to say it once, so everybody shut up for a second, including you, Mark." He picked the 20 back up off the table and held it. "3 months ago, my best friend bet me I couldn't win her. And the word was wrong. The whole word was wrong. You don't win a person. You don't win Clara Hayes. I didn't win anything." He turned the bill over in his fingers. "She was never a prize at the end of a game. She's the strongest person I've ever met, and she climbed out of something that would have buried most people, and she did it with her own 2 hands before I ever showed up. The most I ever did, the best thing I ever did, was not be one more person who tried to shove her back down." He looked up at her. "I didn't win her. I asked. And she chose. That's the only true version. I asked, and she chose me. And a person choosing you is worth about 10,000 times more than a person you won, because winning ends and choosing is something she gets to keep doing every single day." The yard was dead silent. Even Mark had nothing. And Clara Hayes stood up. She walked around the table to Ethan, and she took the $20 bill out of his hand, and she looked at it for a second. The same 20 that had started as a joke about the scary neighbor that she'd confiscated in fury, that had lived on her refrigerator all summer next to a child's drawings, that had somehow become the most honest object either of them owned. "He's right," she said to the yard, to Mark, to all of them. "You don't win me. A lot of people have tried. One of them tried for 6 years." She didn't say the name. She didn't need to. That chapter was closed and permanent and 5 years minimum. He thought he'd won me, and what he actually had was a person too scared to leave. That's not winning. That's just holding something in place. She folded the 20 once crisp, the same way she'd folded it 3 months ago. "This one didn't try to win me," he asked. "And the difference?" Her voice caught, and she let it. She wasn't hiding from these people anymore. "The difference is that winning takes something from you, and asking gives you something back." He asked me a question and let me have my own answer. Nobody had ever done that. In my whole life, nobody had ever once just let me have my own answer. She reached out and she tucked the folded 20 into the front pocket of Ethan's shirt, patting it flat, and she looked up at him and the whole backyard leaned in. "So here's the deal," Clara said, and the dry flat delivery came back. But everyone at that table had long since learned to hear the warmth running under it. "You keep this. And if you ever turn me into a game again, a bet, a prize, a thing to be won, a project to be fixed, I'm out. That's the one rule. I spent 6 years being somebody's thing to manage. I'm not doing it again, not even from you, not even a little." She smoothed the pocket one more time. Then her voice dropped, and it went soft, and it went clean. The cleanest thing she ever said in front of everyone, because she was done saying the important things only in the dark. "But you never have, not once. You asked and you waited and you let me choose. And I'm still choosing you. I'm going to keep choosing you, every day on purpose, out loud, for as long as you let me." And Ethan Cole, who had spent his whole life being a man nobody talked about, who had sat on his father's lever every day and stayed good, who had walked past the worst man he'd ever met in a school parking lot, because a 7-year-old was watching, put his hand over the pocket where the 20 was, over her hand, and he said the only thing left to say. "For as long as you keep choosing," he said, "I'm not going anywhere. I've been telling you that since the fence. Took you long enough to believe it." "I believe it," Clara said. "That's the whole thing, Ethan. I finally believe it." Mark wiping his eyes and pretending he wasn't raised his beer. "So do I get my $20 or not?" "No," said Ethan and Clara at the exact same time, and the whole backyard broke up laughing, and Lily came barreling across the grass to see what was funny, and Ethan scooped her up, and Clara put her hand on the little girl's back, the medium one in the Our House, drawing standing right where a 7-year-old had decided she belonged. And that was the picture, not a prize won, not a game finished, but 3 people who'd each survived something and chosen each other on the far side of it. Victor Hale took a plea deal that fall on the school charge and moved to a different state, and Clara got the automated notification when his address updated, and she read it, and she felt nothing at all, which was its own kind of victory. The man who'd spent 6 years being the weather of her entire life, reduced to a line of text she could read without her hands shaking. She showed it to Ethan. He asked if she was okay. She said she was better than okay, she was free, and then she made him come inside and help her figure out where a family of 3 was going to put all their furniture because a furniture maker and a building inspector had a lot of opinions about furniture, and they were going to need to combine 2 households, and it was going to be in her professional assessment, a nightmare of clashing standards that she was looking forward to more than anything she'd looked forward to in years. They married the next spring small in the same backyard because Mark insisted, and because it had become their place, the place where a stupid bet turned into the truest thing any of them knew. Clara wore no veil and carried no bouquet, and walked herself down the makeshift aisle because she'd learned that the strongest thing she could do was arrive as herself, and Ethan waited for her at the end of it, the way he'd waited for her in a parking lot and a courtroom and 100 nights at a fence patient steady going nowhere. Lily held the rings and took the job extremely seriously, and only dropped one of them once. And when it came time for vows, Clara didn't recite anything traditional. She just reached into the pocket of Ethan's jacket, and she pulled out a folded $20 bill he'd carried there every single day since September, and she held it up so everyone could see it, and she said, "This is where it started. Somebody bet you couldn't win me." She unfolded it. "You never won me. You asked me. And in front of everyone here one more time on purpose out loud, I'm choosing you. I'll choose you tomorrow, and I'll choose you every day after, and the day I stop choosing you, you'll know, because I'll tell you to your face because I don't disappear on people anymore, and I don't explain myself into corners anymore, and I never ever shrink for anyone again." She folded the 20 and put it back in his pocket and patted it flat, the same gesture, the one that had become theirs. "But that day is not coming, so you're stuck with me, Ethan Cole, on purpose, by choice, forever." And Ethan Cole looked at the strongest person he'd ever known, the woman who'd climbed out of a pit with her own 2 hands, and then reached back to pull him past his father's lever in a school parking lot. The medium one in a 7-year-old's drawing of the only house that mattered, and he understood that Mark had been wrong that day in June about everything except the one thing that counted, that this woman was going to change his whole life. Not because he won her, because she chose him, and a person who chooses you freely out loud every single day, with her eyes open and her wall down, and her own 2 feet planted, that is not a prize, and it is not a bet, and it is not a game. It is the only thing in this world worth staying good for. She chose him. He stayed. And no one ever placed a bet on Clara Hayes again.